In the autumn of 1847, a traveling merchant named Samuel Hartwell arrived in the mountain village of Millbrook, Kentucky, carrying with him a collection of daguerreotypes that would haunt the community for generations. These early photographs, taken with primitive equipment that required subjects to remain perfectly still for several minutes, captured something that shouldn't have been possible: the same face appearing in multiple images, taken years apart, showing no signs of aging. The face belonged to Marcus Grayson, a man who had allegedly died in a house fire 3 decades earlier, yet somehow continued to appear in family portraits spanning nearly half a century. Hartwell's discovery would mark the beginning of an investigation into one of Appalachia's most disturbing family lineages, a bloodline that seemed to defy not just the natural order of life and death, but the very concept of time itself. What he uncovered in the mountains of eastern Kentucky would challenge everything the civilized world believed about mortality, family bonds, and the price some are willing to pay for permanence. The Grayson family first appeared in historical records in 1798, when Ezekiel Grayson purchased a substantial tract of land in what would become Bell County, Kentucky. Unlike other settlers who carved out modest homesteads, Ezekiel seemed to possess unusual wealth for a frontier family, paying for his property in gold coins bearing dates from various European nations, some predating the American colonies by centuries. Local land office records, preserved in the county courthouse, note that the clerk questioned the authenticity of these coins, only to have them verified by 3 separate assayers who confirmed not only their genuineness, but their exceptional purity. What made Ezekiel's transaction even more peculiar was his insistence that the deed include mineral rights to a depth of exactly 13 feet, no more, no less. When asked about this specific measurement, he reportedly told the clerk that some things were better left undisturbed, and that 13 feet was precisely the boundary between the world of the living and something else entirely. The clerk, a practical man named Jonathan Mills, dismissed this as mountain superstition and completed the transaction without further inquiry. The Grayson property encompassed a remote valley surrounded by steep ridges, accessible only through a narrow gap that could easily be blocked by a single fallen tree. Within this natural fortress, the family constructed not just a main house, but an entire compound, multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, all built from a distinctive black stone that didn't match any geological formations found elsewhere in the region. Travelers who glimpsed the construction from distant ridges reported that the buildings seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an effect where the structures appeared to exist in perpetual shadow, regardless of the sun's position. By 1805, the Grayson compound was complete, and the family began their integration into the broader community. They attended church services in town, participated in harvest festivals, and conducted business with neighboring farms. Yet there were subtle differences that set them apart from other mountain families. The Graysons never seemed to age at the same rate as their contemporaries. Women who had been young brides when the family first arrived remained youthful decades later, while their husbands retained the vigor and appearance of men half their apparent age. Children born to the family grew to a certain point and then seemed to plateau, remaining in their prime indefinitely. Local physician Dr. Edmund Thorne, who maintained detailed records of his patients from 1810 to 1852, documented his observations of the Grayson family in a private journal discovered after his death. His entries, written in increasingly agitated handwriting, describe medical examinations that defied explanation. Grayson family members showed no signs of common ailments that affected other mountain residents. Their teeth remained perfect, their skin unmarked by scars or blemishes, and their vital signs consistently measured within parameters that Dr. Thorne described as impossibly optimal. Most disturbing to the physician was his observation that wounds on Grayson family members healed with supernatural speed, leaving no trace of injury within days of treatment. The family's unusual longevity might have remained a curious local phenomenon, if not for their participation in a tradition that would eventually expose the true nature of their existence. Every 7 years, the Graysons hosted what they called the Renewal, a gathering that brought together not just the immediate family, but dozens of relatives from across the Appalachian region. These events, held during the darkest nights of winter, drew participants from as far away as West Virginia and Tennessee, all bearing the distinctive features that marked them as Grayson bloodline: unusually pale skin, eyes that seemed to reflect light like an animal's, and a way of moving that suggested they were somehow lighter than ordinary humans. The renewal gatherings were shrouded in secrecy, with the family posting guards at every approach to their valley during the 3-day event. Curious neighbors who attempted to observe the proceedings reported being turned away by men carrying weapons that appeared to be antiques, swords, crossbows, and other implements that seemed more suited to medieval warfare than 19th century Kentucky. Those persistent enough to evade the guards and climb the surrounding ridges described scenes that challenged their understanding of reality. From their vantage points, high above the valley, witnesses reported seeing the Grayson compound illuminated by fires that burned without producing smoke, casting an eerie blue-white light that made the black stone buildings appear to glow from within. The gathered family members moved in precise patterns around these fires, their movements synchronized in ways that suggested extensive rehearsal or some form of inherited knowledge. Most unsettling were the sounds that carried up from the valley, chanting in languages that bore no resemblance to any known dialect, accompanied by what one witness described as the sound of earth itself groaning as if the mountain was in pain. The true nature of these gatherings began to emerge in 1823, when a young woman named Elizabeth Hawkins married into the Grayson family. Elizabeth, the daughter of a neighboring farmer, had been courted by Marcus Grayson for over a year before their wedding. Local women who knew her described a gradual change in Elizabeth's appearance and behavior during her courtship. She became increasingly pale, seemed to require less sleep, and developed an aversion to certain foods that had previously been her favorites. By the time of her wedding, Elizabeth moved with the same uncanny grace that characterized all Grayson family members. Elizabeth's transformation accelerated after her marriage, but it was her letters to her sister Sarah that provided the first detailed account of what occurred within the Grayson compound. These letters, preserved in the Hawkins family Bible, describe rituals that went far beyond simple mountain traditions. Elizabeth wrote of underground chambers beneath the main house, accessible through a stone stairway that descended far deeper than the 13-foot boundary specified in the original land deed. She described rooms carved from living rock, their walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed peripherally, and artifacts that she claimed were older than human civilization. Most disturbing were Elizabeth's descriptions of the family's relationship with what she called the sleepers, entities that she claimed resided in the deepest chambers of the underground complex. According to her letters, these beings were neither alive nor dead in any conventional sense, but existed in a state of suspended animation that allowed them to maintain consciousness across centuries. The Grayson family, Elizabeth wrote, served as caretakers for these entities, providing them with sustenance through rituals that she described only in the vaguest terms, referring to offerings of essence and the sharing of years. The arrangement between the Graysons and the sleepers was, according to Elizabeth's account, a form of symbiosis that granted the family their unusual longevity in exchange for their service. The renewal gatherings were ceremonies where this pact was renewed, with family members descending into the underground chambers to commune with the entities that had sustained their bloodline for generations. Elizabeth's letters suggest that participation in these rituals was not optional for those who married into the family, that the transformation she experienced was irreversible once begun. Sarah Hawkins, alarmed by her sister's increasingly strange letters, attempted to visit the Grayson compound in the spring of 1824. She was turned away at the valley entrance by Marcus Grayson himself, who informed her that Elizabeth was no longer able to receive visitors from her former life. When Sarah persisted, demanding to see her sister, Marcus allegedly told her that Elizabeth had passed beyond the need for such connections, and that any attempt to force a meeting would result in consequences that Sarah would not survive. Desperate to understand what had happened to her sister, Sarah began collecting accounts from other families who had lost members to marriage with the Graysons. What she discovered was a pattern dating back to the family's arrival in Kentucky. Young women who married into the bloodline underwent the same transformation as Elizabeth, becoming increasingly isolated from their birth families until all contact ceased. Men who married Grayson, women experienced similar changes, though Sarah's research suggested that male outsiders were less likely to survive the transformation process completely intact. The last letter Sarah received from Elizabeth arrived in the autumn of 1824, written in handwriting that bore little resemblance to her sister's previous correspondence. The script was more formal, almost archaic in its phrasing, and the content was deeply disturbing. Elizabeth wrote that she had embraced the eternal darkness, and that her previous life was but a fleeting dream before awakening. She described visions of centuries past and future, claiming to have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations that predated recorded history. Most chilling was her assertion that the Grayson family was part of a larger network of bloodlines scattered across the world, all serving similar entities in exchange for their unnatural longevity. The letter concluded with a warning that Sarah should cease her inquiries into the family's affairs, as such knowledge was not meant for those who walk in the light of ordinary days. Elizabeth wrote that she had seen her sister's future in the depths of the underground chambers, and that continued investigation would lead to Sarah's death before her next birthday. True to this prophecy, Sarah Hawkins died in her sleep 7 months later, apparently from no natural cause, leaving behind only her collection of letters and testimonies that would eventually find their way into the hands of Samuel Hartwell 2 decades later. The investigation into Sarah Hawkins' death revealed disturbing patterns that extended far beyond a single family's secrets. County Coroner James Whitfield, a methodical man who had documented every death in the region for over 15 years, discovered that Sarah was the seventh person to die under mysterious circumstances after investigating the Grayson family. Each death occurred within months of the victim expressing concerns about missing relatives who had married into the bloodline, and each autopsy revealed the same inexplicable findings: bodies that showed no signs of disease, injury, or natural causes of death, yet were completely devoid of life. Whitfield's private notes, discovered sealed in a tin box behind a false wall in his office, describe his growing obsession with understanding these deaths. He wrote of examining bodies that appeared to have been drained of some essential quality beyond mere blood, skin that felt like parchment, organs that seemed to have withered from within, and most disturbing of all, eyes that had turned completely black, as if the pupils had expanded to consume the entire iris. The coroner's handwriting becomes increasingly erratic as his entries progress, culminating in a final note dated 3 days before his own mysterious death. They take more than life. They consume the very essence of what makes us human, leaving behind empty shells that cannot sustain existence. The pattern of deaths surrounding those who investigated the Grayson family created a climate of fear that effectively silenced further inquiry for nearly 2 decades. Local ministers stopped mentioning the family in their sermons. Merchants conducted business transactions in tense silence, and even the most gossip-prone residents learned to change the subject whenever the Grayson name arose in conversation. The family's valley became a place that existed in the community's collective consciousness, but was never directly acknowledged, a wound that everyone knew was there, but no one dared to touch. This enforced silence might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of Samuel Hartwell and his collection of daguerreotypes in 1847. Hartwell, a traveling merchant who specialized in early photography equipment, had acquired the images from the estate of a deceased photographer in Louisville. The previous owner, a man named Theodore Ashworth, had reportedly been commissioned to document various mountain families for a historical society project that was never completed. Ashworth's notes, included with the photographic plates, indicated that he had spent several months in the eastern Kentucky mountains during the summer of 1846, taking portraits of what he described as the most unusual subjects I have ever encountered. The daguerreotypes themselves were technically superior to most photography of the era, displaying a clarity and depth that suggested Ashworth possessed exceptional skill with the primitive equipment. However, it was the content of the images that made them truly remarkable. The photographs showed various members of the Grayson family posed in formal arrangements, typical of the period, but with subtle elements that defied explanation. In several images, family members appeared to cast no shadows despite being photographed in bright sunlight. Others showed reflections in mirrors or windows that didn't match the subject's actual positions, as if the camera was capturing something that existed alongside the physical world, but operated according to different rules. Most disturbing were the photographs that showed the same individuals across multiple decades. Marcus Grayson appeared in images dated 1820, 1831, and 1845, showing no signs of aging despite the 25-year span. His wife, identified in Ashworth's notes as Elizabeth, appeared in photographs from 1825 and 1846, her appearance unchanged except for increasingly hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly through the camera lens. Children photographed in the 1820s appeared as adults in later images, but with facial features that remained disturbingly youthful, creating an unsettling combination of mature bearing and ageless appearance. Hartwell's arrival in Millbrook with these photographs created the first public discussion of the Grayson family in over 20 years. The merchant, unaware of the local taboos surrounding the family, displayed the images in the town's general store, inviting residents to examine what he considered fascinating examples of early photographic technique. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several townspeople fled the store upon seeing the images, while others gathered in whispered groups, pointing at specific photographs and sharing fragments of half-remembered stories about the family. The most dramatic response came from an elderly woman named Martha Cornelius, who had been a young bride when the Grayson family first arrived in the valley. Upon seeing a photograph of Marcus Grayson dated 1845, Martha began to weep uncontrollably, claiming that she recognized him as the same man who had attended her wedding in 1802. According to Martha's account, delivered in a trembling voice to the assembled crowd, Marcus had appeared at her celebration, uninvited, wearing clothes that seemed decades out of fashion even then. He had spoken to her briefly, commenting on the beauty of young brides and expressing hope that her marriage would bring her the longevity she deserved. Martha claimed that his touch, when he had taken her hand in congratulation, had felt like ice even in the summer heat, and that his eyes had held a knowledge that no mortal man should possess. Martha's testimony broke the dam of silence that had surrounded the Grayson family for decades. Other elderly residents began to share their own encounters with family members, describing interactions that painted a picture of beings who existed at the margins of human society while maintaining the appearance of normal mountain folk. Thomas Brennan, who had operated a grist mill near the valley entrance since 1815, described transactions with Grayson family members that followed the same pattern for over 30 years. The same individuals would arrive at his mill on the same day each month, bringing grain that appeared to be of impossibly high quality, despite being grown in soil that should have been too rocky and acidic to support such crops. The grain itself was another source of unease among those who had dealt with the family. Brennan's records, maintained in meticulous detail, showed that Grayson grain consistently weighed more than grain from other farms, had an unusual golden color that didn't match any known variety, and produced flour that baked into bread with an unnaturally long shelf life. Customers who purchased this flour reported that bread made from it remained fresh for weeks without showing signs of mold or staleness, but that consuming it regularly led to strange dreams and an aversion to food from other sources. The testimonies collected by Hartwell began to reveal the extent of the Grayson family's influence on the surrounding community. Dr. Edmund Thorne's successor, a younger physician named William Hayes, discovered that his predecessor's medical records contained references to treatments that made no scientific sense. Thorne had apparently prescribed what he called mountain remedies to patients suffering from various ailments, remedies that he claimed were provided by the Grayson family's extensive knowledge of herbal medicine. These treatments were uniformly successful, curing conditions that should have been fatal with 19th century medical knowledge, but patients who received them reported side effects that Hayes found deeply troubling. According to Hayes's review of the old medical records, patients treated with Grayson remedies experienced rapid healing, but also developed an increased sensitivity to sunlight, a need for significantly less sleep, and changes in their dietary preferences that mirrored the transformations observed in those who married into the family. Most concerning were Hayes's observations of these former patients in the present day. Individuals who had been treated decades earlier appeared to have aged more slowly than their contemporaries, displaying the same unsettling vitality that characterized the Grayson bloodline itself. The pattern suggested that the family's influence extended far beyond their immediate descendants, reaching into the community through carefully orchestrated interactions that gradually transformed ordinary residents into something approaching their own condition. Hayes theorized that the Graysons were slowly converting the entire region to their purpose, using medicine, food, and marriage to create a network of individuals who could serve their needs while maintaining the appearance of a normal mountain community. This revelation prompted Hartwell to expand his investigation beyond the photographic evidence. Working with a small group of residents who had been less affected by the family's influence, he began to map the full extent of the Grayson presence in the region. What they discovered was a web of connections that stretched across multiple counties, linking seemingly unrelated families through marriages, business partnerships, and shared rituals that had been conducted in secret for decades. 6. The investigation revealed that the original Grayson compound was not the family's only stronghold, but rather the center of a network that included smaller settlements scattered throughout the Appalachian region. These satellite communities, often consisting of no more than a few related families, maintained the same architectural style as the main compound, buildings constructed from the mysterious black stone that seemed to absorb light and create an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. Each settlement was positioned in a remote valley or hollow, accessible only through narrow passes that could be easily defended or blocked. Communication between these settlements appeared to follow patterns that defied conventional understanding of 19th century transportation. Messages and goods moved between the communities with a speed and efficiency that suggested either supernatural means or a level of organization that far exceeded what should have been possible for isolated mountain families. Hartwell's investigation uncovered evidence of a postal system that operated independently of government services, carrying correspondence written in codes that mixed English with symbols that resembled no known language. The scope of the Grayson network became clear when Hartwell discovered that several families he had initially considered separate entities were actually branches of the same bloodline, using different surnames to disguise their connections. The Blackwood family of Shadow Creek, the Thornhill Harvesters, and even the Stillwater Soulbinders all shared distinctive physical characteristics and ritual practices that marked them as part of the same extended clan. Each family specialized in different aspects of what appeared to be a coordinated effort to establish supernatural influence throughout the Appalachian region. The coordination between these bloodlines suggested a hierarchy that placed the original Grayson family at the apex of a supernatural confederation. Evidence of this organizational structure emerged when Hartwell discovered a series of carved stone markers positioned at specific intervals throughout the mountain region. These markers, roughly 3 feet in height and bearing the same unknown symbols found in Grayson correspondence, appeared to serve as territorial boundaries between different family domains. Local hunters who had encountered these stones reported that crossing from one marked territory to another produced immediate physical sensations, sudden temperature changes, alterations in air pressure, and an overwhelming sense of being observed by unseen watchers. The markers themselves defied conventional understanding of stonework. Despite being exposed to decades of mountain weather, they showed no signs of erosion or damage. More disturbing was their apparent ability to influence the behavior of local wildlife. Animals that approached the stones displayed signs of extreme agitation, often fleeing in panic or circling the markers in repetitive patterns until they collapsed from exhaustion. Hunters noted that game trails, which had followed the same paths for generations, were gradually shifting to avoid the marked territories entirely, creating dead zones where no living creature would venture. Hartwell's investigation took a darker turn when he began to examine the contents of abandoned homesteads within these marked territories. Families who had lived in these areas for generations had quietly departed over the years, leaving behind possessions that told stories of gradual transformation and eventual flight. Personal journals found in these deserted homes described experiences that paralleled those of individuals who had married into the Grayson family. Progressive changes in physical appearance, altered sleep patterns, and an increasing inability to tolerate the company of unchanged humans. One particularly detailed account came from the journal of Rebecca Morrison, whose family had farmed a small plot near the boundary between Grayson and Blackwood territories. Rebecca's entries, spanning 3 years from 1843 to 1846, documented her family's slow metamorphosis from ordinary mountain folk into something that increasingly resembled their supernatural neighbors. The transformation began with subtle changes, improved health, enhanced night vision, and an inexplicable knowledge of weather patterns that allowed them to predict storms days in advance. Rebecca wrote with growing unease about her children's development, noting that they seemed to understand concepts and languages that they had never been taught. As the transformation progressed, Rebecca's journal entries became increasingly fragmented and disturbing. She described family members who no longer required regular meals, subsisting instead on substances that she referred to only as the essence of growing things. Her husband developed the ability to communicate with their livestock through methods that transcended normal animal training, while her eldest son began to demonstrate an uncanny talent for finding lost objects and missing persons. Most troubling were Rebecca's accounts of nighttime visitations from figures she identified as representatives of the surrounding supernatural families, beings who arrived without invitation to observe the family's progress and provide guidance for their continued development. The final entries in Rebecca's journal, written in handwriting that barely resembled her earlier script, described a family that had become something fundamentally different from their original humanity. She wrote of children who could see in complete darkness, of a husband who no longer cast a reflection in mirrors, and of her own transformation into a being that existed partially outside the normal flow of time. The last entry, dated simply the night before leaving, contained only a single line. "We have become what we were always meant to be, but the price of understanding is the loss of everything we once were." The Morrison homestead, when Hartwell finally located it, contained evidence that supported Rebecca's account. The house itself showed signs of modifications that defied practical explanation. Windows that had been sealed from the inside with the same black stone used in Grayson construction, rooms that appeared to have been deliberately darkened, and a cellar that had been excavated to depths that suggested connection to the underground systems described in other accounts. Most disturbing were the personal effects left behind. Clothing that seemed to have been tailored for bodies, with proportions that didn't match normal human anatomy. Books written in the same mysterious script found in Grayson correspondence, and implements that appeared to be designed for rituals that Rebecca had only hinted at in her journal. The pattern of gradual transformation and eventual departure repeated across dozens of homesteads throughout the region. Families who had lived in the mountains for generations were quietly disappearing, leaving behind evidence of their metamorphosis into something that could no longer coexist with unchanged humanity. The process appeared to be accelerating, with entire communities vanishing over the course of months rather than years. Hartwell began to suspect that the Grayson network was approaching some form of critical mass, a point at which their influence would become irreversible and their control over the region absolute. This suspicion was confirmed when Hartwell discovered correspondence between various family leaders discussing what they called the Great Convergence. These letters, written in a mixture of English and the unknown script, described preparations for an event that would unite all the scattered bloodlines under a single authority. The correspondence suggested that the individual families had been working toward this goal for decades, gradually increasing their numbers and influence until they could openly claim dominion over the entire Appalachian region. The letters revealed that the supernatural families had been carefully monitoring the outside world, preparing for the inevitable moment when their existence would be discovered by authorities beyond the isolated mountain communities. They had developed contingency plans for dealing with government investigators, religious leaders, and anyone else who might pose a threat to their activities. These plans involved not just the elimination of threats, but the conversion of key individuals to their cause, creating a network of influence that extended far beyond the mountains themselves. Most chilling were references to what the families called the final harvest, a ritual that would supposedly grant them the power to extend their influence across the entire continent. The letters suggested that this ceremony required the participation of all the bloodlines simultaneously, channeling their combined supernatural abilities toward a single purpose. The exact nature of this ritual remained unclear from the correspondence, but references to the awakening of the deepest sleepers and the opening of the eternal doors suggested consequences that would affect far more than the immediate region. Hartwell's investigation reached a critical point when he discovered the location where the Great Convergence was scheduled to take place. Hidden deep within the original Grayson territory, accessible only through a network of caves that connected the underground chambers of multiple family compounds, lay a natural amphitheater carved from living rock. The space was enormous, capable of holding hundreds of participants, with walls covered in the same mysterious symbols that appeared on the territorial markers. At the center of the amphitheater stood a structure that defied description, a formation of black stone that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating optical illusions that made observers question their own sanity. The amphitheater showed evidence of recent use, with residual traces of rituals that had been conducted in preparation for the main event. Burn marks on the stone floor formed patterns that hurt to look at directly, while the walls bore stains that appeared to be made from substances that couldn't be identified by conventional means. Most disturbing were the alcoves carved into the amphitheater walls, each one sized to hold a human body and bearing inscriptions that suggested they were intended for some form of sacrifice or transformation. Local geology couldn't explain the amphitheater's existence. The rock formation showed no signs of natural erosion or human tool marks, as if it had been shaped by forces that operated outside normal physical laws. The acoustic properties of the space were equally inexplicable. Sounds made at the center of the amphitheater could be heard clearly throughout the chamber, while whispers from the alcoves seemed to carry impossible distances. Hartwell noted that spending extended periods in the space produced disorientation and hallucinations, suggesting that the location itself possessed properties that affected human consciousness. The discovery of the amphitheater confirmed Hartwell's worst fears about the scope of the supernatural family's ambitions. The Great Convergence was not simply a gathering of isolated mountain clans, but the culmination of a centuries-long plan to establish supernatural dominion over the American continent. The families had been preparing for this moment since their arrival in the New World, gradually building their strength and influence while remaining hidden from the authorities who might have stopped them. Evidence suggested that the ritual was scheduled to coincide with specific astronomical events that occurred only once every several centuries. The families had been tracking these celestial alignments through methods that combined ancient knowledge with careful observation, waiting for the moment when the barriers between the physical and supernatural worlds would be at their weakest. The convergence of multiple bloodlines at the sacred site during this critical period would supposedly grant them the power to reshape reality according to their will. Hartwell's investigation revealed that the families had been making final preparations for months, gathering resources and participants from across their network. Caravans of supplies had been moving toward the central territory under cover of darkness, while family members from the most distant settlements had begun arriving at the various compounds. The level of organization required for such an undertaking suggested that the families possessed communication and transportation methods that far exceeded what should have been available to 19th century mountain dwellers. The merchant realized that he had stumbled upon something that threatened not just the local community, but potentially the entire nation. The supernatural families had spent decades establishing their influence through carefully orchestrated infiltration of normal society, placing their agents in positions where they could monitor and manipulate government activities. The Great Convergence would provide them with the power to extend this influence indefinitely, creating a shadow authority that would control American development from within. Hartwell's attempts to warn the outside world met with the same fate that had befallen previous investigators. His letters to government officials went unanswered. His reports to religious authorities were dismissed as mountain superstition, and his efforts to interest newspaper editors in the story were met with polite but firm refusal. The family's network of influence had apparently anticipated such efforts, ensuring that information about their activities would never reach those with the power to act upon it. The merchant's growing desperation led him to increasingly dangerous attempts to gather evidence that would force the outside world to acknowledge the threat. He began photographing the abandoned homesteads, documenting the territorial markers, and even attempting to capture images of the amphitheater itself. The results were consistently disappointing. The mysterious black stone refused to register properly on photographic plates, while the symbols and markings that were clearly visible to the naked eye failed to appear in the developed images. More troubling were the signs that Hartwell's investigation had attracted the attention of the families themselves. He began to notice figures watching him from distant ridges, shadows that moved independently of their supposed sources, and sounds that suggested he was being followed during his travels through the mountains. His horse became increasingly skittish, often refusing to approach certain areas, or suddenly bolting without apparent cause. Local residents, who had initially been willing to share their knowledge, began to avoid him entirely, crossing streets to prevent encounters or claiming to have forgotten conversations that had taken place only days earlier. The psychological pressure of his investigation began to take its toll on Hartwell's mental state. His journal entries from this period show increasing paranoia and confusion, with handwriting that deteriorates as his observations become more frantic and disjointed. He wrote of dreams that felt more real than waking life, of voices that spoke to him in languages he didn't recognize but somehow understood, and of a growing certainty that his investigation had changed him in ways that might prove irreversible. The final phase of Hartwell's investigation began when he discovered that the Great Convergence was scheduled to take place within a matter of weeks. The families had completed their preparations and were beginning to gather at the sacred site, bringing with them artifacts and implements that would be used in the ritual. The merchant realized that he had only one opportunity to document the ceremony and escape with evidence that might convince the outside world to take action against the supernatural threat. Hartwell's final gambit required him to infiltrate the convergence ceremony itself, a decision that would prove both his greatest triumph and his ultimate undoing. Using knowledge gathered from months of investigation, he identified a network of natural caves that connected to the amphitheater from above, providing a vantage point from which he could observe the ritual without being detected. The approach was treacherous, requiring him to navigate underground passages that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them, as if the mountain itself was trying to prevent his intrusion. The caves leading to the amphitheater revealed evidence of the family's true antiquity. The walls bore carvings that predated any known Native American presence in the region, depicting scenes of rituals that involved creatures that bore only passing resemblance to humans. These ancient artworks showed beings with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, performing ceremonies around structures that matched the black stone formations found throughout the Grayson territory. The style of the carvings suggested they had been created over centuries, with newer additions layered over older work in a continuous record of supernatural activity. As Hartwell descended deeper into the cave system, he encountered chambers that defied the normal laws of physics. Rooms that appeared small from the entrance opened into vast spaces that shouldn't have been able to exist within the confines of the mountain. Water flowed upward along the walls in some passages, while others contained air that felt thick and heavy, as if it had been compressed by some unknown force. The temperature fluctuated wildly between chambers, creating microclimates that ranged from Arctic cold to tropical heat within the span of a few steps. The most disturbing discovery in the caves was a series of alcoves that contained what appeared to be preserved human remains. These bodies, arranged in ceremonial poses, showed signs of the same transformations that Hartwell had observed in the living members of the supernatural families. The preserved figures displayed elongated limbs, skin that had taken on a translucent quality, and facial features that seemed to have been stretched beyond normal human proportions. Most unsettling were their eyes, which remained open and appeared to track movement, despite the obvious fact that the bodies had been dead for decades. Hartwell's examination of these preserved remains revealed that they wore clothing and jewelry that spanned multiple historical periods. Some figures were dressed in styles that predated European colonization, while others wore garments that appeared to be from more recent decades. The implication was clear. The families had been conducting their transformative rituals for centuries, preserving the results as either trophies or warnings for future generations. The bodies themselves seemed to serve as waypoints in the family's supernatural development, marking the progression from human to something entirely other. The final chamber before the amphitheater contained the most extensive collection of artifacts that Hartwell had encountered during his investigation. Weapons forged from the same black stone used in family construction filled wooden racks along the walls, their edges maintained in perfect condition despite their apparent age. Books written in the mysterious script were arranged on shelves that extended far beyond what the chamber's dimensions should have allowed, creating an optical illusion that made Hartwell question his own perception. Musical instruments, crafted from materials that he couldn't identify, sat ready for use, their surfaces covered in symbols that seemed to move when viewed peripherally. The centerpiece of this collection was a mirror that didn't reflect the viewer's image, but instead showed scenes from different times and places. Hartwell watched in fascination as the mirror's surface displayed what appeared to be historical events, battles fought with weapons that matched those stored in the chamber, rituals conducted in locations that bore resemblance to the territorial markers he had discovered, and gatherings of figures who possessed the same supernatural characteristics as the modern families. The mirror seemed to be displaying the true history of the bloodlines, revealing their involvement in events that had shaped the development of the American continent. As Hartwell prepared to make his final approach to the amphitheater, he encountered his first living member of the supernatural families in their true form. The figure that emerged from the shadows bore little resemblance to the human-appearing individuals he had observed in town. Its limbs were elongated to the point where it moved with an unsettling, spider-like gait, while its face had been stretched into proportions that emphasized features that seemed designed for purposes other than human expression. Most disturbing were its eyes, which reflected light like an animal's, but contained an intelligence that was unmistakably aware of Hartwell's presence. The encounter was brief but revealing. The creature spoke in a voice that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, using words that Hartwell understood despite their being spoken in no language he recognized. It acknowledged his investigation with what might have been approval, suggesting that his documentation of the family's activities had been anticipated and even encouraged. The implication was that Hartwell's role was not that of an outside observer, but rather an unwitting participant in a plan that extended far beyond his understanding. The creature's words carried a weight that seemed to alter the very air around them, creating pressure changes that made Hartwell's ears pop and his vision blur. It spoke of cycles that measured time in centuries rather than years, of preparations that had been ongoing since before the founding of the American nation, and of purposes that would reshape the continent according to patterns that had been established in ages past. The families were not simply mountain dwellers who had developed supernatural abilities, but rather agents of forces that had been active throughout human history, guiding development from the shadows while maintaining the appearance of ordinary mortality. Most chilling was the creature's revelation that Hartwell's investigation had been monitored from the beginning, with his movements and discoveries carefully orchestrated to ensure that he would arrive at the amphitheater at precisely the right moment. His role in the coming ceremony was not that of a hidden observer, but rather a crucial participant whose presence would help to bridge the gap between the supernatural and mundane worlds. The families had been preparing for this moment for decades, waiting for someone with the right combination of curiosity, determination, and ignorance to serve as their unwitting agent. The creature's parting words contained a warning that chilled Hartwell to his core. It spoke of transformations that could not be reversed, of knowledge that would forever separate him from ordinary humanity, and of responsibilities that would extend far beyond his own lifetime. The investigation that he had begun as a simple merchant's curiosity had evolved into something that would define not just his own fate, but the future of everyone who came into contact with the evidence he had gathered. The families had not simply allowed his investigation to continue. They had actively guided it toward this moment of revelation. Hartwell's final approach to the amphitheater revealed the true scope of the Great Convergence. The vast chamber was filled with hundreds of figures representing all the supernatural bloodlines that had been scattered throughout the Appalachian region. Each family group was arranged in precise formations that corresponded to the territorial markers he had discovered, creating a living map of their influence that extended far beyond what he had initially imagined. The Graysons occupied the central position, but they were surrounded by dozens of other families whose names he had never encountered during his investigation. The ceremony itself defied description using conventional language. The participants moved in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles that operated outside normal geometry, creating formations that appeared to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The chanting that accompanied their movements combined elements from languages that spanned different historical periods, suggesting that the ritual incorporated knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries of supernatural development. The acoustic properties of the amphitheater amplified these sounds in ways that created harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very structure of reality itself. As the ceremony progressed, Hartwell observed changes in the participants that revealed the true nature of their transformation. The human appearances that the families had maintained in their interactions with ordinary society began to dissolve, revealing forms that were increasingly alien with each passing moment. Limbs elongated and contracted according to needs that served purposes beyond normal human function, while faces shifted to accommodate senses that operated outside the normal spectrum of human perception. The transformation was not simply physical, but seemed to involve a fundamental alteration of their relationship with the physical world itself. The central focus of the ceremony was a structure that had been concealed beneath the amphitheater's floor until the ritual began. As the participants' chanting reached crescendo, the black stone surface began to crack and shift, revealing a formation that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The structure defied visual comprehension, appearing to be simultaneously solid and translucent, ancient and newly formed, small enough to fit within the chamber and vast enough to contain entire worlds. Looking directly at it produced disorientation and nausea, while peripheral vision revealed details that couldn't be reconciled with its apparent size and shape. The family's interaction with this structure revealed the true source of their supernatural abilities. The formation was not simply a ritual focus, but rather a gateway to realms that existed beyond the normal boundaries of reality. The entities that Elizabeth Grayson had referred to as the sleepers were not dormant beings within underground chambers, but rather active forces from these other dimensions, using the families as conduits for their influence in the physical world. The rituals that the families had conducted for generations were not simply ceremonies, but rather maintenance procedures for keeping this gateway stable and functional. As the ceremony reached its climax, Hartwell witnessed the arrival of beings that challenged his understanding of what was possible within the confines of reality. These entities possessed forms that seemed to shift between different states of existence, sometimes appearing as recognizable creatures, and other times manifesting as geometric patterns that moved with apparent intelligence. They communicated with the assembled families through methods that bypassed normal sensory perception, creating direct transfers of information that left the participants visibly changed by the experience. The purpose of the Great Convergence became clear as Hartwell observed the interaction between the families and these otherworldly entities. The ceremony was not simply a gathering of supernatural bloodlines, but rather a formal transfer of authority from the entities to their human agents. The families were being granted independence from their previous role as caretakers and servants, receiving the power to establish their own dominion over the physical world. The transformation that individual family members had undergone over the years was revealed to be preparation for this moment when they would become the primary agents of supernatural influence rather than mere intermediaries. The implications of this transfer were staggering. The families would no longer be limited to the remote mountain valleys where they had maintained their hidden existence. They would be free to expand their influence throughout the continent, using their supernatural abilities to reshape American society according to their own purposes. The network of agents that they had already established in positions of influence would serve as the foundation for a shadow government that would control national development from within, ensuring that the country's growth would serve their otherworldly masters' ultimate objectives. Hartwell's observation of the ceremony was interrupted when he realized that his presence had been detected by the participants. The chanting that had filled the amphitheater suddenly ceased, and hundreds of transformed faces turned toward his hiding place with expressions that combined curiosity with predatory intent. The families had not simply allowed his investigation to continue, they had actively guided him to this moment because his presence was required for the ceremony's completion. His role as a witness from the ordinary world was apparently necessary to legitimize the transfer of power that was taking place. The merchant's attempt to flee was futile. The cave system that had provided his access to the amphitheater had been altered during the ceremony, with passages that had been open now sealed and new routes that led deeper into the mountain rather than toward the surface. The families had anticipated his presence and prepared for his participation in the ritual's conclusion, ensuring that he would be available to serve whatever purpose his investigation had been designed to fulfill. His documentation of their activities had not been a threat to their secrecy, but rather a requirement for their success. The confrontation between Hartwell and the assembled families revealed the true extent of his transformation during the investigation. Months of exposure to their influence had changed him in ways that he had not recognized, preparing him for a role that extended far beyond simple observation. His ability to perceive the supernatural elements of their activities, his resistance to the psychological effects that had driven other investigators to madness or death, and his compulsion to document their rituals had all been carefully cultivated through his interactions with their agents and territories. The family's leader, revealed to be not Marcus Grayson, but rather an entity that had been using his form as a disguise, explained Hartwell's true purpose in the ceremony. His investigation had served as a form of reconnaissance, mapping the family's influence and documenting their capabilities for purposes that extended beyond his understanding. The evidence he had gathered would be used to establish contact with similar supernatural networks in other regions, coordinating a continental expansion of their influence that would ultimately reshape the entire continent according to otherworldly designs. More disturbing was the revelation that Hartwell's investigation had been one of many similar operations conducted simultaneously across the American frontier. Other merchants, travelers, and officials had been unknowingly recruited to document supernatural activities in their regions, creating a comprehensive survey of otherworldly influence that would guide future expansion efforts. The families were not isolated mountain dwellers, but rather part of a coordinated network that spanned the entire continent, with each regional group serving specific functions in a larger plan that had been developing for centuries. The ceremony's conclusion involved Hartwell's formal induction into the family's network, a process that completed the transformation that had been occurring throughout his investigation. The change was not simply physical, but involved a fundamental alteration of his relationship with reality itself, granting him perceptions and abilities that would allow him to serve as a bridge between the supernatural and mundane worlds. His role would be to return to ordinary society and establish the connections that would allow the families to expand their influence without triggering the kind of resistance that open supernatural activity might provoke. The transformation process revealed the true horror of the family's activities. The beings that had appeared human during their interactions with ordinary society were revealed to be wearing their humanity like a disguise, maintaining the appearance of mortality while serving purposes that were fundamentally alien to human nature. Their integration into mountain communities had not been an attempt to coexist with normal society, but rather a preliminary phase in a conquest that would ultimately consume everything that made humanity distinct from their otherworldly masters. Hartwell's final journal entries, written during his transformation, document the dissolution of his individual identity and its replacement with something that served the family's collective purpose. His handwriting changes throughout these entries, evolving from his familiar script into symbols that match those found throughout the family's territories. The content of his writing shifts from personal observations to technical descriptions of processes and procedures that would guide future supernatural operations, suggesting that his consciousness had been subsumed into a larger intelligence that spanned the entire network. The last coherent entry in Hartwell's journal contains a warning that he apparently managed to write during a moment of clarity before his transformation was complete. He wrote of the family's true purpose being not simply regional dominance, but rather the preparation of the American continent for colonization by entities that existed outside normal reality. The supernatural bloodlines were advance agents for an invasion that would ultimately replace human civilization with something that served otherworldly purposes, using the infrastructure and resources that humanity had developed to support forms of existence that were fundamentally incompatible with terrestrial life. The warning contained specific details about the family's expansion plans, including their intention to establish similar networks in major population centers throughout the continent. They had been carefully studying American society during their decades of hidden existence, identifying the key institutions and individuals that would need to be controlled or eliminated to ensure their success. The transformation process that they had perfected in their mountain territories would be applied on a massive scale, converting entire populations into agents of their otherworldly masters while maintaining the appearance of normal human society. Most chilling was Hartwell's revelation that the family's activities were not limited to the American continent, but were part of a global network that had been operating for centuries. Similar supernatural bloodlines existed in other regions of the world, each one preparing their territories for the same kind of transformation that was planned for America. The coordination between these groups suggested a level of organization that spanned continents and cultures, unified by their service to entities that existed outside the normal boundaries of human experience. The journal's final pages contain increasingly fragmented passages that document Hartwell's complete integration into the family's collective consciousness. His individual perspective dissolves into a stream of technical information about supernatural processes, territorial expansion strategies, and preparation procedures for the coming transformation of human civilization. The handwriting becomes increasingly difficult to decipher, eventually evolving into pure symbol systems that convey information through methods that bypass normal linguistic comprehension. The disappearance of Samuel Hartwell marked the end of the last serious investigation into the supernatural family's activities. His merchant's wagon was found abandoned on a mountain road, its contents scattered as if he had fled in panic. But no trace of the man himself was ever discovered. The daguerreotypes that had initiated his investigation vanished along with him, leaving behind only the testimonies of those who had seen them and the fragmentary records of his research. The families had successfully eliminated the final threat to their secrecy while gaining a valuable agent for their expansion efforts. The aftermath of Hartwell's disappearance saw the acceleration of the family's influence throughout the region. Communities that had maintained their independence for generations began to show signs of the same transformation that had affected the isolated homesteads. Local officials, who had previously resisted the family's subtle influence, found themselves making decisions that served supernatural purposes, while religious leaders began to incorporate elements of the family's beliefs into their sermons. The network of control that had been established gradually over decades suddenly tightened into a web that encompassed entire counties. The expansion was not limited to the immediate region. Reports began to emerge from other areas of the continent describing similar supernatural activities, suggesting that the Great Convergence had indeed initiated a coordinated effort to establish otherworldly dominance throughout North America. Travelers who had witnessed the family's activities in Kentucky reported encountering similar bloodlines in other mountain regions, each one displaying the same supernatural characteristics and organizational structure. The pattern suggested that Hartwell's investigation had been timed to coincide with a continental expansion that had been planned for decades. The true scope of the family's success became apparent only in retrospect, as historians examining the period noted anomalies in population movements, economic development, and political decisions that couldn't be explained by conventional historical analysis. Entire communities had vanished from census records, while others had experienced sudden prosperity that seemed to have no identifiable source. Government officials had made policy decisions that served no apparent national interest, while religious movements had emerged that incorporated beliefs and practices that bore no resemblance to traditional American Christianity. The family's influence extended into the highest levels of American society, with evidence suggesting that they had successfully placed their agents in positions of significant political and economic power. The rapid expansion of the railroad system during the latter half of the 19th century followed routes that served the family's territorial interests, while industrial development was concentrated in areas that provided resources for their supernatural activities. The transformation of American society during this period was not simply the result of technological and economic progress, but rather the implementation of plans that had been developed by otherworldly intelligence for purposes that extended far beyond human comprehension. The legacy of the Grayson family and their supernatural allies continues to influence American development in ways that remain largely hidden from public awareness. The network that they established during the 19th century evolved into modern institutions that maintain their otherworldly connections while presenting themselves as ordinary components of contemporary society. The transformation process that they perfected in their mountain territories has been refined and adapted for use in urban environments, allowing them to expand their influence without triggering the kind of investigation that threatened their secrecy in earlier periods. Contemporary researchers who have attempted to trace the family's continued activities have encountered the same obstacles that frustrated earlier investigators. Records disappear from archives, witnesses become reluctant to discuss their experiences, and evidence fails to register properly in modern documentation systems. The family's mastery of supernatural concealment has evolved along with their expansion, ensuring that their activities remain hidden even as their influence extends throughout American society. The network that began in the remote valleys of eastern Kentucky has grown into a shadow authority that operates at every level of national governance, commerce, and culture. The mountain valleys, where the families first established their presence, remain largely uninhabited, with modern development projects consistently failing to establish permanent settlements in these areas. Hunters and hikers who venture into these regions report experiences that echo the accounts of 19th century observers, unexplained sounds, impossible geometries, and encounters with figures that seem to exist partially outside normal reality. The territorial markers that Samuel Hartwell discovered continue to influence the behavior of both wildlife and human visitors, creating boundaries that are respected even by those who have no knowledge of their supernatural significance. The amphitheater where the Great Convergence took place has never been located by modern investigators, despite extensive searches of the cave systems beneath the original Grayson territory. Some researchers theorize that the structure exists in a state of dimensional flux, appearing only when specific conditions are met or when the families require access to their otherworldly allies. Others suggest that the amphitheater serves as a permanent gateway between realities, allowing the entities that originally controlled the families to maintain their influence over terrestrial affairs without requiring physical presence in the normal world. The question of whether the supernatural families continue to exist in their original form or have evolved into something even more removed from human nature remains unanswered. Modern sightings of individuals who display the characteristic features of the bloodlines are rare and often dismissed as folklore or misidentification. However, the consistent nature of these reports across different regions and time periods suggests that the families have maintained their presence while adapting their appearance and methods to contemporary circumstances. Their influence may be less visible than during their 19th century expansion, but it appears to be no less extensive or effective. The story of the Grayson family serves as a reminder that the forces that shaped American development were not limited to the political, economic, and technological factors that dominate historical narratives. Hidden influences operating outside normal human understanding played crucial roles in determining the direction of national growth, establishing patterns that continue to affect contemporary society in ways that remain largely unrecognized. The supernatural network that began in the mountains of eastern Kentucky expanded to encompass the entire continent, creating a shadow authority that operates according to principles that serve otherworldly rather than human purposes. The implications of this hidden history extend far beyond academic curiosity. If the family's influence continues to operate within modern American institutions, then many of the decisions that shape contemporary society may be serving purposes that are fundamentally incompatible with human welfare. The transformation process that they perfected during their mountain phase may be continuing on a scale that encompasses entire populations, gradually converting ordinary citizens into agents of otherworldly authority while maintaining the appearance of normal democratic governance. The success of their concealment methods suggests that this process could continue indefinitely without triggering the kind of resistance that might threaten their ultimate objectives. The investigation that began with Samuel Hartwell's collection of daguerreotypes ultimately revealed a threat that extends far beyond the isolated mountain communities where it was first discovered. The supernatural family's activities represent a form of colonization that operates through gradual transformation rather than open conquest, ensuring that their victims remain unaware of their changing nature until the process is irreversible. The network that they established continues to expand, adapting to new circumstances while maintaining its fundamental purpose of preparing human civilization for absorption into otherworldly systems of existence. The true horror of the Grayson legacy lies not in the supernatural abilities that the families displayed, but in the systematic nature of their approach to human transformation. They demonstrated that entire populations could be gradually converted to serve otherworldly purposes while maintaining the appearance of normal social development. Their success in concealing this process from contemporary observers suggests that similar transformations could be occurring in modern society without triggering the kind of investigation that might reveal their true nature. The family's greatest achievement was not their supernatural abilities, but their demonstration that human civilization could be subverted from within by forces that operate according to principles that are fundamentally alien to human nature. The documentation of the Grayson family's activities would have remained buried in obscurity if not for an unexpected discovery made during the construction of a federal highway project in 1962. Engineers clearing a section of mountainous terrain in eastern Kentucky uncovered a cache of documents that had been sealed within a metal container and buried beneath what appeared to be a deliberately constructed stone cairn. The papers, remarkably preserved despite their age, contained Samuel Hartwell's complete research notes, along with additional materials that suggested his investigation had been more extensive than previously known. The discovery team, led by construction foreman William Braddock, initially dismissed the find as historical curiosities until they began examining the photographs contained within the cache. Unlike the daguerreotypes that had disappeared with Hartwell, these images were printed on paper using techniques that shouldn't have existed in the 1840s. The photographs showed scenes from inside the underground amphitheater, capturing moments from the Great Convergence ceremony with a clarity that revealed details invisible to the naked eye. Most disturbing were images that appeared to show the same individuals photographed across different decades, their faces unchanged despite the passage of time. Braddock's crew reported immediate difficulties after the discovery. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation, surveying instruments provided contradictory readings, and several workers experienced vivid nightmares that left them unable to continue their duties. The construction project, which had been proceeding ahead of schedule, suddenly encountered delays that seemed to multiply with each passing day. Local residents, who had been supportive of the highway development, began filing complaints about noise and disruption, despite the fact that work had been suspended pending investigation of the discovered materials. The federal response to the discovery was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours of the initial report, the construction site was cordoned off by agents claiming to represent the Department of the Interior. The workers were debriefed individually and required to sign documents that prohibited them from discussing their experiences with anyone outside the investigation team. The cache of materials was confiscated, and the construction crew was reassigned to projects in other states. Official records indicate that the highway project was canceled due to environmental concerns, though no environmental impact study had been conducted prior to the discovery. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, an anthropologist who had been studying Appalachian folklore for over a decade, managed to examine portions of the confiscated materials before they were sealed by federal authorities. Her private notes, discovered after her death in 1984, describe documents that challenged fundamental assumptions about the region's history. Hartwell's research had apparently uncovered evidence that the supernatural family's influence extended far beyond the Kentucky mountains, reaching into major population centers throughout the eastern United States. The merchant had documented a network of agents who had been placed in positions of authority within government agencies, religious institutions, and commercial enterprises. The most significant revelation in Hartwell's expanded research concerned the family's relationship with historical events that had shaped American development. His documentation suggested that several major political decisions during the antebellum period had been influenced by supernatural agents working to advance their otherworldly masters' objectives. The expansion of slavery into new territories, the development of transportation networks, and even the selection of sites for major cities appeared to have been guided by considerations that served purposes beyond normal human understanding. The families had been operating as a shadow government for decades, using their supernatural abilities to manipulate national policy according to plans that originated in otherworldly intelligence. Dr. Thornfield's analysis of the photographic evidence revealed technical sophistication that defied explanation using 19th century knowledge. The images showed impossible perspectives, captured light in ways that shouldn't have been achievable with available equipment, and displayed subjects in states of transformation that suggested the photographer had been present during rituals that changed the fundamental nature of reality itself. Most disturbing were photographs that appeared to show the same locations at different points in time, as if the camera had been capable of recording events across multiple decades simultaneously. The anthropologist's investigation into the family's continued activities revealed patterns that suggested their influence had not diminished with the passage of time. Communities throughout the Appalachian region showed signs of the same gradual transformation that had affected the mountain valleys during the 19th century. Population statistics revealed anomalies that couldn't be explained by normal demographic trends, while economic development followed patterns that served no apparent rational purpose. Local governments made decisions that consistently favored projects and policies that aligned with the family's historical objectives, despite opposition from residents who seemed unable to organize effective resistance. Thornfield's research uncovered evidence that the families had adapted their methods to contemporary circumstances while maintaining their fundamental purpose. The transformation process that had once required direct physical contact now operated through more subtle means: contaminated water supplies, altered food distribution systems, and even broadcast signals that carried subliminal influences designed to prepare populations for supernatural conversion. The family's mastery of concealment had evolved along with their expansion, ensuring that their activities remained hidden even as their influence extended throughout modern American society. The anthropologist's final report, submitted to university administrators just weeks before her death, described a threat that extended far beyond academic interest. The supernatural families had successfully infiltrated every level of American society, establishing a network of control that operated according to principles that were fundamentally incompatible with human welfare. Their influence was not limited to remote mountain communities, but it spread into urban centers where millions of people were being gradually transformed without their knowledge or consent. The process was irreversible once begun, ensuring that each generation would be more thoroughly integrated into the family's otherworldly system than the previous one. The university's response to Thornfield's report was immediate and decisive. Her research was classified as sensitive material and removed from public access, while her position was terminated due to what administrators described as methodological concerns. The anthropologist's attempts to publish her findings were blocked by legal challenges that questioned her right to discuss materials that had been declared government property. Within months of submitting her report, Thornfield was found dead in her home, apparently from natural causes that left no trace of external intervention. The pattern of suppression that had protected the family's activities for over a century continued to operate with modern efficiency. Researchers who attempted to investigate Thornfield's work encountered obstacles that seemed to multiply with each effort to uncover the truth. Archives containing relevant materials were repeatedly inaccessible due to technical problems, while witnesses who had initially been willing to discuss their experiences suddenly became reluctant to continue their cooperation. The family's network of influence had evolved to encompass modern information systems, ensuring that their activities remained hidden even in an age of unprecedented communication capabilities. Contemporary investigators who have attempted to trace the family's current activities have discovered that the supernatural bloodlines have not disappeared, but have instead integrated themselves so thoroughly into American society that they have become virtually indistinguishable from ordinary citizens. The physical transformations that once marked them as different from normal humans have been replaced by more subtle alterations that allow them to blend seamlessly into modern communities. Their supernatural abilities have been refined to operate within contemporary frameworks, using technology and social structures to achieve objectives that would have required obvious magical intervention in earlier periods. The family's influence on modern American development can be traced through patterns that repeat the same strategies they employed during their 19th century expansion. Urban planning decisions consistently favor projects that serve their territorial objectives, while transportation networks are designed to facilitate movement between locations that hold significance for their supernatural activities. Economic policies promote industries that provide resources for their otherworldly purposes, while social programs are structured to identify and recruit individuals who display potential for transformation into their network. The educational system has proven particularly susceptible to the family's influence, with curricula that gradually prepare students for integration into their supernatural network. History courses emphasize interpretations that obscure the family's role in American development, while science education focuses on concepts that make students more receptive to otherworldly explanations for natural phenomena. Literature and arts programs promote themes that align with the family's philosophical objectives, ensuring that each generation is more thoroughly prepared for supernatural conversion than the previous one. Religious institutions have been systematically infiltrated by agents who promote interpretations of traditional faiths that serve the family's purposes. Sermons increasingly incorporate elements that prepare congregations for acceptance of otherworldly authority, while religious education programs emphasize concepts that make students more susceptible to supernatural influence. The family's understanding of human psychology, refined through centuries of practice, allows them to manipulate religious sentiment in ways that advance their objectives while maintaining the appearance of orthodox belief. The medical system has become a particularly effective tool for the family's transformation programs. Hospitals and clinics in areas under their influence report unusual patterns of treatment that seem designed to alter patients' fundamental nature rather than simply address their immediate health concerns. Pharmaceutical companies develop medications that produce side effects consistent with the early stages of supernatural transformation, while medical research focuses on projects that advance the family's understanding of human biology and psychology. The integration of these influences into standard medical practice ensures that millions of people are gradually prepared for conversion without their knowledge or consent. The political system has been thoroughly compromised by the family's network of agents, with elected officials at every level making decisions that serve otherworldly rather than human interests. Legislative priorities consistently favor projects that advance the family's territorial objectives, while regulatory agencies implement policies that facilitate their supernatural activities. The complexity of modern government provides numerous opportunities for concealed influence, ensuring that the family's agenda is advanced through countless small decisions that appear routine but collectively serve their larger purpose. The media has proven particularly valuable for the family's concealment efforts, with news organizations consistently failing to investigate stories that might expose their activities. Journalists who attempt to pursue such investigations encounter obstacles that seem to multiply with each effort to uncover the truth, while editors and publishers implement editorial policies that discourage coverage of supernatural phenomena. The family's understanding of information management, developed through centuries of practice, allows them to control public perception in ways that maintain their secrecy while advancing their objectives. The entertainment industry has become a sophisticated tool for the family's psychological preparation programs. Movies, television shows, and other media productions increasingly incorporate themes that make audiences more receptive to otherworldly explanations for natural phenomena. The content appears to be ordinary entertainment, but careful analysis reveals patterns that consistently promote concepts aligned with the family's philosophical objectives. The cumulative effect of this exposure is to gradually prepare entire populations for acceptance of supernatural authority while maintaining the appearance of normal cultural development. The technology sector has provided the families with unprecedented opportunities for influence and control. Computer systems and communication networks are designed with hidden capabilities that allow for monitoring and manipulation of users' behavior, while software applications collect data that reveals individuals' susceptibility to supernatural influence. The family's agents within technology companies ensure that new developments serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial innovation. The integration of these technologies into daily life creates a comprehensive surveillance and control system that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness. The financial system has been thoroughly penetrated by the family's network, with banks and investment firms implementing policies that serve otherworldly rather than economic objectives. Market movements increasingly reflect the family's territorial and resource requirements rather than normal supply and demand factors, while regulatory agencies implement policies that facilitate their supernatural activities. The complexity of modern finance provides numerous opportunities for concealed influence, ensuring that the family's agenda is advanced through countless transactions that appear routine but collectively serve their larger purpose. The agricultural system has become a particularly insidious tool for the family's transformation programs. Food production facilities in areas under their influence report unusual patterns of processing that seem designed to alter the fundamental properties of consumed products rather than simply provide nutrition. Chemical additives and processing techniques produce effects consistent with the early stages of supernatural transformation, while distribution networks ensure that affected products reach consumers throughout the country. The integration of these influences into standard food production ensures that millions of people are gradually prepared for conversion through their daily consumption habits. The transportation system has been designed to facilitate the family's movement and communication while restricting the mobility of ordinary citizens. Highway routes consistently favor locations that serve their territorial objectives, while public transportation systems are structured to channel population movements according to their requirements. Air travel regulations implement security measures that allow for screening and identification of individuals who might pose threats to their activities, while shipping networks facilitate the movement of materials required for their supernatural operations. The construction industry has become a tool for the family's territorial expansion, with building codes and zoning regulations that promote architectural designs aligned with their supernatural requirements. New developments consistently incorporate elements that serve otherworldly purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary residential and commercial construction. The family's understanding of sacred geometry and spatial relationships, refined through centuries of practice, allows them to create environments that facilitate their activities while remaining undetectable to normal human perception. The legal system has been thoroughly compromised by the family's network of agents, with judges and attorneys making decisions that serve otherworldly rather than human interests. Court proceedings increasingly favor interpretations of law that advance the family's territorial objectives, while regulatory agencies implement policies that facilitate their supernatural activities. The complexity of modern legal frameworks provides numerous opportunities for concealed influence, ensuring that the family's agenda is advanced through countless decisions that appear routine but collectively serve their larger purpose. The emergency services system has become a sophisticated tool for the family's monitoring and control programs. Police departments in areas under their influence report unusual patterns of response that seem designed to identify and recruit individuals who display potential for supernatural transformation. Fire departments and medical emergency services implement protocols that facilitate the family's activities while maintaining the appearance of ordinary public safety operations. The integration of these influences into standard emergency response ensures that the families maintain awareness of and control over events that might threaten their secrecy. The social services system has proven particularly valuable for the family's recruitment and transformation programs. Child welfare agencies increasingly implement policies that identify and separate children who display potential for supernatural conversion, while adult services programs target individuals who might be susceptible to otherworldly influence. The family's understanding of human psychology and social dynamics, refined through centuries of practice, allows them to manipulate social service systems in ways that advance their objectives while maintaining the appearance of ordinary governmental function. The environmental protection system has become a tool for the family's territorial control, with regulations that consistently favor preservation of areas that hold significance for their supernatural activities. National parks and wilderness areas are managed according to principles that serve otherworldly rather than ecological objectives, while environmental impact studies are conducted in ways that obscure the family's influence on natural systems. The family's understanding of the relationship between supernatural forces and natural phenomena allows them to manipulate environmental policy in ways that advance their objectives while maintaining the appearance of ordinary conservation efforts. The scientific research system has been thoroughly penetrated by the family's network, with universities and research institutions implementing programs that serve otherworldly rather than academic objectives. Grant funding consistently favors projects that advance the family's understanding of human biology and psychology, while research publications promote theories that make readers more receptive to supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. The family's agents within academic institutions ensure that new discoveries serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary scientific progress. The healthcare system has become a comprehensive tool for the family's transformation programs, with hospitals and clinics implementing treatment protocols that serve supernatural rather than medical objectives. Patient care increasingly incorporates elements that prepare individuals for integration into the family's otherworldly network, while medical research focuses on projects that advance their understanding of human transformation processes. The integration of these influences into standard healthcare ensures that millions of people are gradually prepared for conversion through their routine medical interactions. The insurance industry has provided the families with unprecedented opportunities for population monitoring and control. Insurance policies are structured to collect data that reveals individuals' susceptibility to supernatural influence, while claims processing systems identify and track people who might pose threats to their activities. The family's agents within insurance companies ensure that policy decisions serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial operations. The comprehensive nature of modern insurance coverage creates a surveillance system that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness while serving otherworldly objectives. The retail system has become a sophisticated tool for the family's psychological preparation programs. Shopping centers and retail establishments are designed according to principles that make consumers more susceptible to supernatural influence, while product placement and marketing strategies promote concepts aligned with the family's philosophical objectives. The family's understanding of human psychology and consumer behavior, refined through centuries of practice, allows them to manipulate retail environments in ways that advance their objectives while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial activity. The tourism industry has proven particularly valuable for the family's territorial expansion efforts. Tourist attractions and recreational facilities are developed in ways that serve otherworldly rather than economic objectives, while visitor services implement programs that identify and recruit individuals who display potential for supernatural transformation. The family's agents within the tourism industry ensure that new developments serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial hospitality. The mobility of modern tourism provides opportunities for influence and recruitment that extend far beyond their traditional territorial boundaries. The phenomenon of urban decay in certain American cities reveals patterns that suggest systematic supernatural influence rather than normal economic decline. Neighborhoods that once thrived mysteriously deteriorate despite efforts at revitalization, while residents report experiences that echo the accounts of 19th century observers in the Kentucky mountains. Buildings develop structural problems that defy engineering explanation, while public spaces become gathering points for individuals who display the characteristic features of supernatural transformation. The family's influence on urban development appears to be creating zones of otherworldly activity within major population centers, establishing footholds for expanded operations while maintaining the appearance of ordinary urbis in decay. The modern manifestation of the family's transformation process has been refined to operate through subtle environmental modifications rather than the direct rituals employed in earlier periods. Air quality in affected areas contains trace elements that produce neurological effects consistent with the early stages of supernatural conversion, while water supplies are contaminated with substances that alter human physiology in ways that facilitate otherworldly influence. The family's mastery of chemistry and biology, developed through centuries of experimentation, allows them to implement transformation programs that operate below the threshold of detection while producing cumulative effects that prepare entire populations for integration into their network. The digital age has provided the families with unprecedented opportunities for influence and control that extend far beyond their traditional methods. Internet communications are monitored and manipulated to identify individuals who might pose threats to their activities, while social media platforms are used to promote concepts that make users more receptive to supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. The family's agents within technology companies ensure that new developments serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary commercial innovation. The pervasive nature of modern digital communication creates a comprehensive surveillance and influence system that operates continuously while serving otherworldly objectives. The global nature of modern commerce has allowed the families to extend their influence far beyond the American continent, establishing networks that coordinate supernatural activities across multiple countries and cultures. International trade agreements consistently favor projects that serve otherworldly rather than economic objectives, while multinational corporations implement policies that facilitate the family's activities while maintaining the appearance of ordinary business operations. The family's understanding of global systems and international relations, refined through centuries of practice, allows them to manipulate worldwide development in ways that advance their objectives while maintaining their traditional secrecy. The space program has become a particularly sophisticated tool for the family's long-term objectives, with missions that serve otherworldly rather than scientific purposes. Satellite networks are designed with hidden capabilities that facilitate communication with entities that exist outside normal reality, while space exploration programs focus on locations that hold significance for supernatural activities. Now, the family's agents within space agencies ensure that new developments serve their purposes while maintaining the appearance of ordinary scientific exploration. The expansion of human activity into space provides opportunities for otherworldly influence that extend far beyond terrestrial boundaries. The evidence suggests that the Grayson family's legacy has evolved into a comprehensive system of control that operates at every level of modern American society. Their influence has become so thoroughly integrated into contemporary institutions that it has become virtually indistinguishable from normal social and economic development. The transformation process that once required direct physical contact now operates through environmental modifications, technological systems, and social structures that prepare entire populations for supernatural conversion while maintaining the appearance of ordinary progress. The implications of this hidden influence extend far beyond historical curiosity. If the family's network continues to operate according to its original otherworldly objectives, then the fundamental nature of American civilization may be changing in ways that serve purposes incompatible with human welfare. The gradual transformation of the population may be approaching a critical threshold where the process becomes irreversible, ensuring that future generations will exist primarily to serve entities that operate according to principles alien to human nature. The success of the family's concealment methods suggests that this transformation could continue indefinitely without triggering the kind of resistance that might threaten their ultimate objectives. Their mastery of information management, psychological manipulation, and social control has evolved to encompass modern communication systems and democratic institutions, ensuring that their activities remain hidden even as their influence extends throughout contemporary society. The network that began in the remote valleys of eastern Kentucky has grown into a shadow authority that operates at every level of national and international governance. The question of whether this transformation can be reversed or even recognized by those who are undergoing it remains unanswered. The family's understanding of human psychology and social dynamics, refined through centuries of practice, may have reached a level of sophistication that makes resistance impossible for ordinary individuals. Their influence may have become so pervasive that questioning their authority has become literally unthinkable for most people, ensuring that their objectives are advanced through the voluntary cooperation of populations that believe they are acting according to their own free will. The story of the Grayson family serves as a warning about the vulnerability of democratic societies to influences that operate outside normal political and economic frameworks. Their success demonstrates that entire civilizations can be gradually subverted by forces that understand human nature better than humans understand themselves, using that knowledge to implement transformation programs that serve otherworldly rather than human purposes. The techniques they developed in their mountain laboratories have been refined and adapted for use in modern urban environments, creating a comprehensive system of control that operates below the threshold of conscious awareness while serving objectives that extend far beyond human comprehension. The true horror of the family's achievement lies not in their supernatural abilities, but in their demonstration that human civilization can be redirected to serve purposes that are fundamentally incompatible with human welfare, while maintaining the appearance of normal social development. Their success in concealing this process from contemporary observers suggests that similar transformations could be occurring in other societies without triggering the kind of investigation that might reveal their true nature. The family's greatest accomplishment may be their proof that humanity's greatest threat comes not from external conquest, but from internal transformation that proceeds with the voluntary cooperation of its victims.